The hospital corridor stretches before me like a fluorescent-lit tunnel to hell. And my heels click against the linoleum in perfect rhythm with my racing heart. 3 missed calls, 1 cryptic voicemail, and now this, my mother refusing to see me. I'm Sarah, and until today, I thought I knew exactly who I could trust. Mrs. Thompson? A nurse touches my arm, her face pinched with concern. Your mother is stable now, but she's quite adamant about not having visitors. That's impossible. I'm her primary caregiver. We live together. My voice cracks, betraying the panic I'm trying to suppress. There must be some mistake. The nurse glances at her clipboard. She was quite clear. Perhaps you could try again tomorrow? Clear about what exactly? I step closer, forcing her to meet my eyes. What did she say? I'm sorry, but... Please. My fingers dig into the strap of my purse. She's all I have. The nurse's professional mask slipped slightly. She said, and I quote, "Tell Sarah she knows what she did." That's all. The words hit me like a physical blow. I sink into one of the waiting room chairs, my mind racing through the past few weeks. Nothing makes sense. Mom and I have been closer than ever since her accident 6 months ago, since I convinced Mark we needed to move her in with us. My phone buzzes. Speaking of Mark. Hey, honey. How is she? His voice carries that perfect note of concern that usually soothes me. Today, something about it scrapes against my nerves. She won't see me. I swallow hard. She told the nurse I know what I did, but Mark, I don't know what she's talking about. A pause. Too long. That's strange. Maybe the heat got to her? It has been unusually warm in the house lately. The house? My free hand clenches into a fist. What do you mean? Well, you know how your mother's always complaining about the temperature. I thought it might help if we limited the air conditioning use in her wing of the house. The pieces click together with sickening clarity. You did what? Sarah, be reasonable. Our electricity bill. She has circulation issues since the accident. Her doctor specifically said, I stop, remembering Mom's flushed face last week, how she'd been wearing only light nightgowns lately. The nurse said she collapsed from heat exhaustion. You're overreacting. Besides, she's fine now, isn't she? The casual dismissal in his tone makes my stomach turn. I think about all the small changes over the past months, Mom becoming quieter, more withdrawn. Mark's increasing irritation whenever I spent time with her. I need to go, I say flatly. Wait, honey. Don't do anything rash. Let's talk about this when you get home. I'm making your favorite dinner. The manipulation is so obvious now that I'm looking for it. How many other things have I missed? I'll be home soon, I lie, already walking toward Mom's room. Some rules are meant to be broken. I find her lying there, small and pale against the white sheets. Her eyes are open, staring at the ceiling. Mom? My voice wavers. She turns her head away. Go home to your husband, Sarah. Not until you tell me what's really been happening. I move closer, noting how she tenses. Please, Mom. Whatever it is. Whatever it is? She laughs, a harsh sound I've never heard from her before. Ask Mark about the nursing home brochures in his desk. Ask him about the talks we've been having when you're at work. Ask him why he told me I was becoming a burden to you, that you were too afraid to tell me yourself. The world tilts sideways. I grab the bed rail to steady myself, feeling the cool metal bite into my palm. I start, but the truth is already unfolding in my mind, a horrible origami of betrayal and manipulation. Mom finally looks at me, her eyes bright with unshed tears. I thought I was protecting you by staying quiet. I thought I was being strong. I reach for her hand, and this time she lets me take it. We were both wrong about that, I say softly. But we won't be quiet anymore. The drive home from the hospital feels like navigating through quicksand. Every traffic light holds me hostage to memories of the past 6 months, Mom's brave smile as we helped her move in. Mark's increasingly tight-lipped responses whenever I mentioned making the arrangement permanent. I pull into our driveway at 9:47 p.m. The house glows with warm light, and the scent of garlic and herbs wafts through the air when I open the door. A perfect domestic scene, except for the silence from Mom's wing of the house. There you are. Mark appears in the kitchen doorway, dish towel over his shoulder. I was getting worried. How's Diane? I study his face, the concern in his eyes, the slight furrow between his brows. 6 months ago, I would have melted into his arms, grateful for his support. Now, I see the performance. She's staying overnight for observation. I set my purse down carefully, buying time. The doctors want to monitor her heart. Her heart? His eyebrows shoot up. I thought it was just heat exhaustion. Funny how that happens when someone can't use air conditioning in 90-degree weather. He sighs, reaching for my hand. I step back. Sarah, we talked about this. The bills. Did we? Because I remember you mentioning the electric bill once, and I remember telling you Mom's health comes first. You're upset. Let's eat first, then we can discuss this rationally. He gestures toward the dining room, where I spot 2 place settings. Just 2. Where's Mom's plate? I assumed she'd be staying in the hospital. He shrugs. No point in wasting food. The casual dismissal hits harder than any accusation. I move past him into the kitchen, opening drawers until I find what I'm looking for, the household files where we keep all our bills. What are you doing? I spread the electric bills across the counter. May, June, July. The numbers tell their own story. Our usage is down 30% from last year. My voice sounds strange, distant. That's not cost-cutting, Mark. That's cruelty. You're being dramatic. Your mother's fine. She's not fine. The stack of papers scatters as I slam my hand down. She collapsed today because you've been torturing her with heat, and God knows what else. His face changes, hardening into something I've never seen before. Torturing her? I've bent over backwards to accommodate her living here. Do you know what it's like, coming home to find her wheeling around our space, rearranging things, acting like she owns the place? Our space? I repeat. This is her home now. No, it's not. He steps closer, voice dropping. This is our home, Sarah. The home we built together. The home where we were supposed to start our family, remember? The words hit like a slap. We'd been trying for a baby when Mom had her accident. I'd put fertility treatments on hold, knowing we couldn't handle both situations at once. Don't you dare use that against me. I'm not using anything. I'm stating facts. His tone turns reasonable, practiced. We can't put our lives on hold indefinitely. Your mother has options, good ones. I've been researching facilities. Behind my back. Because you refuse to see reason. He runs a hand through his hair, frustration breaking through his calm facade. I'm trying to save our marriage here, Sarah. Can't you see that? I look around our kitchen, the granite countertops we'd picked together, the fancy coffee maker he'd surprised me with last Christmas. All the trappings of a perfect life, maintained at the expense of basic humanity. Save our marriage? I laugh, and it sounds like breaking glass. You know what I see? I see the man who promised to love and honor me systematically torturing my mother because she inconvenienced him. That's not. I'm going to pack some things. I cut him off, already moving toward the stairs. Mom and I will stay at a hotel tonight. His hand catches my arm. Don't do anything rash. Let's sleep on it, talk tomorrow when we're both calmer. I look down at his fingers wrapped around my wrist, then up at his face, still trying to control, to manipulate, to shape reality to his liking. You're right about one thing, I say quietly. We do need to talk tomorrow. About divorce lawyers. His grip tightens for a fraction of a second before releasing me. As I climb the stairs, I hear him calling Linda, his mother. Perfect. Let him run to mommy. I've got some calls to make myself. The hotel room key feels like a surrender in my hand. I should be packing mom's things, making calls, taking action. Instead, I'm standing in our home office, staring at Mark's desk drawer like it might bite me. His words echo, I've been researching facilities. The drawer sticks when I pull it. Inside, beneath a stack of warranties and manuals, I find a manila folder labeled Care Options. My hands shake as I open it. Glossy brochures spill out: Sunset Valley Assisted Living, Golden Years Care Home, Paradise Gardens. Each one marked with post-it notes in Mark's precise handwriting: affordable. No waiting list. Takes difficult cases. My phone buzzes. Linda's name flashes on the screen. I silence it, but not before noticing 3 missed calls from her. Of course Mark went crying to mommy. Something catches my eye, a letter poking out from behind the brochures. Official letterhead, Thompson Family Trust. What are you doing? I whirl around. Mark stands in the doorway, his face unreadable. Finding out exactly how long you've been planning to get rid of my mother. Getting rid of, Jesus, Sarah, you make it sound sinister. I'm trying to find solutions. Solutions? I wave the trust letter. Like this? Care to explain why you're accessing your family trust without telling me? He moves faster than I expect, snatching the paper from my hand. That's private. Private? Like the way you've been privately torturing my mother? Or privately planning to ship her off to some facility? You want to talk about private? His voice rises. How about the private conversations you and your mother have, excluding me from my own home? How about the private way you decided to move her in without really discussing it with me? We did discuss it. No, you informed me. There's a difference. He steps closer, and for the first time, I see raw anger in his eyes. You know what's really private? The fact that your mother's been sabotaging our marriage since day one. That's ridiculous. Is it? Who convinced you to postpone fertility treatments? Who always has some crisis when we plan a vacation? Who needs your attention every time we try to have a date night? Each accusation lands like a physical blow. She had an accident, Mark. She needed us. She needed you. I needed my wife. He softens his voice, reaching for me. I still need my wife. I step back, bumping into the desk. Something shifts behind me, a stack of papers sliding, revealing another folder. This one's labeled Renovation Plans. Mark lunges for it, but I'm faster. Inside are architectural drawings of our house, with an entire wing redesigned. Notes in the margins catch my eye: Mother's suite. Dad's study. Your parents, I whisper. You're planning to move your parents in. Sarah. You're trying to force my mother out so you can move your parents in? My voice rises with each word. While she's in the hospital? It's not like that. Mom and Dad need help too, and their family. And my mother isn't? The rage builds, hot and clean. Or is it different because your parents can still walk? Because they're not an inconvenience? They wouldn't take over our lives. He slams his hand on the desk. They understand boundaries. They respect marriage. They're not damaged goods. I finish quietly. Not like my mother. His silence is answer enough. I reach for my phone, dialing the hospital. Hello? This is Sarah Thompson. I need to speak to my mother's doctor about changing her emergency contacts and medical proxy. Mark's face darkens. What are you doing? I hold up a finger as the nurse connects me. Yes, I want to remove Mark Thompson from all documentation. Immediately. I pause, listening. Yes, I understand. I'll be there in 20 minutes to sign the papers. You can't do this, Mark says as I hang up. Watch me. I grab my purse, then turn back to face him. Oh, and Mark? When I get back, I expect my mother's room to be exactly as it is now. Touch one thing, and I'll make sure everyone, including your precious mother, knows exactly what kind of man you really are. His face contorts. You wouldn't dare. Try me. I head for the door, then pause. You know what the funny thing is? You were so worried about my mother taking over our lives, you never noticed you'd become the monster in this story. The sound of something shattering against the wall follows me out. I don't look back. I've seen enough. The hospital parking lot at midnight feels like neutral territory. I sit in my car, staring at the stack of signed papers on the passenger seat, medical proxy forms, emergency contact updates, preliminary divorce filings. My phone lights up again, Linda, then Richard, then Mark in rapid succession. I silence them all. A tap on my window makes me jump. Dr. Reynolds stands there, looking concerned. Mrs. Thompson? Your mother's asking for you. The walk to Mom's room feels different now. No more confusion, no more doubt. Just the weight of decisions that can't be undone. Mom's sitting up in bed, her hands folded in her lap. You shouldn't have come back so late. Had some paperwork to handle. I settle into the chair beside her. Mom, I need you to tell me everything. Every conversation with Mark, every incident. All of it. She closes her eyes. It started small. Comments about how tired you looked, how stressed. Then suggestions about facilities that could help us all. When I refused. She twists the blanket between her fingers. He started moving things. My photos would disappear, then reappear in boxes. The thermostat would be reset when you weren't home. My medication would be misplaced. Each word feels like acid in my veins. Why didn't you tell me? He said you were talking about starting fertility treatments again. That my presence was the only thing holding you back. Her voice cracks. I thought if I could just endure it. A noise at the door interrupts us. Linda Thompson stands there, perfectly coiffed even at midnight, her face a mask of maternal concern. Sarah, darling. We've been so worried. Were you? I stand, positioning myself between her and Mom. Or were you just checking if your son's plan was working? Plan? I don't know what you mean. She steps into the room, reaching for my hand. Mark's beside himself. He says you're not thinking clearly. I'm thinking more clearly than I have in months. I pull away from her touch. Did you know? About the renovation plans? About moving you and Richard in? Something flickers across her perfect facade, triumph, maybe, or satisfaction. Well, naturally we discussed options. With your mother's condition. My condition? Mom's voice cuts through the room like steel. You mean the condition your son made worse by systematically torturing me? Linda's mask slips further. Torture is a very strong word. Mark was simply trying to help everyone see reason. By causing my mother's collapse? The pieces click together suddenly. The renovation plans are dated 3 months ago. You knew. You all knew. Sometimes difficult decisions must be made for the good of the family. Linda straightens her designer jacket. Really, Sarah, you're being melodramatic. No one's been tortured. We're simply trying to create a more suitable arrangement. Suitable? I laugh, and it sounds like breaking glass. Like how Mark made it suitable for my mother by hiding her medication. Or did you suggest that technique? Linda's face hardens. You don't want to do this, Sarah. Think about your future. About children. About. Get out. The words come out soft, deadly. Get out before I call security and tell them exactly how your son engineered my mother's collapse. You wouldn't dare create a scandal. Try me. I pull out my phone. I wonder how your charity board would react to hearing about elder abuse? Or Mark's law firm? She backs toward the door, her perfect composure cracking. You'll regret this. Family should stick together. You're right. I move closer, lowering my voice. That's exactly what Mom and I are doing. Now get out. After she leaves, Mom reaches for my hand. Sarah, you don't have to. Yes, I do. I squeeze her fingers gently. But first, we need to make a call. To whom? I pull out a business card I'd found in Mark's desk, one he'd clearly never intended to use. To Dad. It's time we had a real conversation about what happened 15 years ago. And about how he can help us make sure the Thompsons never hurt anyone else again. Mom's eyes widen. You found him? No. I smile, and it feels like baring teeth. But Mark did. And he was stupid enough to keep the contact information. Sometimes the best revenge isn't just about getting even. It's about rebuilding what others tried to destroy, and making them watch as their own carefully constructed world falls apart. The business card feels heavy in my hand as I sit in my father's law office. James Carter, the name I haven't spoken in 15 years, is emblazoned in gold letters on his desk nameplate. He hasn't aged like I expected, he's sharper, harder. Elder abuse cases are complex, he says, reviewing the documentation I've brought. But financial manipulation, medical neglect, these are prosecutable offenses. I don't want prosecution. I lean forward. I want destruction. His eyebrows lift slightly. That doesn't sound like the daughter I remember. You don't know the daughter I've become. The words come out colder than intended. You made sure of that when you walked away. He sets down the papers. Is that what your mother told you? We're not here about that. Aren't we? He stands, moves to his window. Mark Thompson contacted me 6 months ago. Did you know that? The air leaves my lungs. What? He wanted information about your mother's accident. About the settlement she received. He turns back to me. About why I really left. My hands clench. Stop trying to. Your mother's accident wasn't random, Sarah. The driver who hit her? He worked for Richard Thompson's company. The world tilts sideways. That's impossible. That was before I even met Mark. Richard Thompson has a pattern of targeting vulnerable women. Arranging accidents, then having his son swoop in as the perfect solution. He pulls out a thick file. You're not the first. But you could be the last. My phone buzzes, Mark's name on the screen. When I don't answer, a text appears, coming home soon. Mom and Dad want to discuss living arrangements. How many? My voice sounds distant. 3 that we know of. All followed the same pattern: accident, settlement, marriage, then mysterious institutionalization of the mother. He pauses. The wives never contested anything. They were too grateful to their loving husbands who'd helped them through such difficult times. Bile rises in my throat. You knew. You knew and you never warned me? I tried. Remember that background check I insisted on running when you got engaged? The one you refused because I was trying to control your life like always? Memory hits like a slap, the argument, the tears, Mom taking my side. Why didn't you try harder? Would you have listened? His voice gentles. You needed to see it yourself. But now we can stop them. Another text from Mark: your mother's room is ready at Sunset Valley. We can move her tomorrow. No. I stand abruptly. We're not just stopping them. We're taking everything. Sarah. You're the best corporate lawyer in the state, Dad. That's why Mark contacted you, isn't it? To handle the trust fund transfer? I smile, and it feels like breaking glass. So let's give him exactly what he wants. Understanding dawns in his eyes. A trap. Better. A choice. I pull out my phone, typing quickly, coming home now. You're right. We need to talk about arrangements. They'll suspect something if I'm suddenly involved. No, they won't. Because you're going to tell them exactly what they want to hear, that you've always regretted choosing mom over their business interests. That you want to make things right. And your mother? Is being discharged tomorrow into their perfect trap. I stand straighter. Except this time, we'll be ready. My phone buzzes again, Mark's response, perfect. Mom's making your favorite dinner. Dad's bringing the trust paperwork. It's dangerous, Dad warns. If they realize. They won't. They're too convinced of their own brilliance. I gather my things. Besides, they taught me well. Family should stick together, right? He studies me for a long moment. You're not doing this just for revenge anymore, are you? No. I head for the door. I'm doing it because some monsters need to see their own reflections before you destroy them. I pause. Are you with me? Until the end. He picks up his phone. I'll call Richard. Set things in motion. As I leave, another text arrives. From Mom this time. Are you sure about this? I type back, trust me. It's time we showed them what real family loyalty looks like. The elevator doors close on my reflection. I barely recognize the woman staring back. She looks dangerous, determined. Good. They'll never see me coming. The family dinner table has never felt more like a battlefield. Linda beams at me from across the perfectly arranged place settings while Richard shuffles papers beside his wine glass. Mark's hand rests possessively on my shoulder, heavy as a chain. James was so understanding about everything, Richard says, sliding the trust documents forward. Weren't you, old friend? Dad nods, his lawyer's mask firmly in place. Water under the bridge. Family comes first. Mom sits silently in her wheelchair, wearing the face I've seen too many times lately, quiet, defeated. Except now I notice the slight tension in her hands, the watchful gleam in her eyes. She's ready. Sarah, darling, Linda reaches across the table, her diamond bracelet catching the light. We're so relieved you've come around about Sunset Valley. It's really the best solution for everyone. Of course. I force a smile. Mark helped me see reason. Mark's fingers dig deeper into my shoulder. I knew you'd understand eventually. Sometimes we have to make hard choices for the greater good. Speaking of choices, Richard interrupts, these papers just need your signature, Sarah. Then we can proceed with the transfer of assets and the new living arrangements. I reach for the pen, but Mom's wheelchair scrapes against the floor. I need my medication first. I'll get it, Mark offers quickly. No. I stand. I know where everything is. In the kitchen, I grab Mom's pill organizer and my phone, checking the recording app. Still running. Every word, every confession, captured perfectly. I text Dad, ready? His response comes instantly, police on standby. Security footage confirmed. Get clear first. Sarah? Mark's voice carries from the dining room. Everything okay? Coming. I return with the pills and a glass of water, carefully settling Mom's medication beside her plate. She takes them slowly, deliberately. Now then, Richard slides the papers closer. Shall we? I pick up the pen, studying the documents. Just one question first. I look directly at Richard. How many other women did you arrange accidents for before my mother? The room freezes. Mark's hand tightens painfully on my shoulder. I don't know what you're talking about, Richard says smoothly. James, control your daughter. Oh, I think you do. I pull out my phone, playing the recording from earlier. Richard's voice discussing previous arrangements with Mark. Planning Mom's accident, calculating settlement amounts. Linda's perfect smile cracks. Mark? It's not what you think, Mark starts, but I cut him off. It's exactly what we think. The accident, the marriage, the systematic abuse, all carefully planned. I stand, shrugging off Mark's grip. But you made one mistake. Sarah, Mark's voice turns dangerous. Think very carefully about what you're doing. I have. I move toward Mom. You assumed I was like those other wives, so grateful for my knight in shining armor that I'd ignore the monster underneath. Richard stands abruptly. This is ridiculous. We're leaving. No, you're not. Dad's voice cuts through the tension. The police are outside. They have everything, the recordings, security footage, financial records. It's over. Mark lunges for me, but Mom's wheelchair rolls suddenly, blocking his path. In the chaos, Linda screams, Richard knocks over his wine glass, and the front door bursts open. Everything happens fast after that. Handcuffs click, rights are read, Linda collapses in theatrical sobs. Through it all, I stand perfectly still, watching Mark's face as his carefully constructed world crumbles. You'll regret this, he hisses as they lead him past. You're nothing without me. No, I say quietly. I was nothing with you. That was the point, wasn't it? Later, after the police clear out and Mom's settled in her room, her real room, not some facility, Dad finds me in the kitchen. Staring at the ruins of dinner. You okay? I look at the family photos on the wall, all those perfect moments, carefully staged. They'll make bail. Probably. But the evidence is solid. They're finished. It doesn't feel like enough. My hands shake as I gather broken glass. All those other women. Then we'll find them. He takes the glass from my hands. Together this time. I nod, feeling the weight of everything, victory, exhaustion, grief, crash over me at once. I trusted him. I loved him. I know. Dad's voice gentles. That's what made you stronger than them. You loved, and you still fought back. From upstairs, Mom calls my name. As I head up, I pause to take down one last wedding photo. Some things need to break completely before they can be rebuilt. And some monsters need to learn that their greatest weapons, love, trust, family, can become their undoing. The courthouse bathroom mirror reflects a woman I barely recognize. 3 months of legal battles have stripped away any softness I once had. Mom wheels up beside me as I adjust my blazer. He's here, she says quietly. With his whole family. Of course he is. Mark never could resist an audience for his performances. The preliminary hearing should be simple, just establishing grounds for the criminal charges. But nothing with the Thompsons is ever simple. As we enter the courtroom, I spot them, Linda dabbing theatrical tears, Richard in an expensive suit that screams respectability, and Mark. Mark looking exactly like the man I fell in love with. That's the most dangerous thing about him. Dad meets us at the prosecution table, his face grim. They've filed a countermotion. Claiming your mother's mentally unfit to testify. The rage rises so fast it threatens to choke me. On what grounds? Sarah. Mark's voice carries across the room, soft and concerned. Can we talk? Just for a minute? Before I can respond, he's there, close enough that I catch the familiar scent of his cologne. You don't want to do this, he murmurs. Think about what it will do to your mother, having to relive everything in public. Don't you dare pretend to care about her now. I've always cared. His hand brushes mine, and I jerk away. About both of you. This whole thing. It's a misunderstanding. Dad's lawyers can make it all go away. We can start fresh. Mr. Thompson, Dad's voice cuts through the manipulation. Step away from my client. Mark's mask slips for just a second, long enough for me to see the rage underneath. But then Linda appears, all maternal concern. "Sarah, darling, please. We're family." "Family?" Mom's voice carries clearly through the murmuring courtroom. "Is that what you call orchestrating accidents for vulnerable women? Planning their institutionalization?" Linda blanches. Richard steps forward, but the bailiff moves closer, watching. "You have no proof of those allegations," Richard says smoothly. "And soon you'll have no credibility either. Imagine how it will look, a bitter divorcee and her mentally unstable mother, making wild accusations." "Actually," Dad pulls out a folder, "we have something better than allegations. Meet Claire Peterson and Maria Santos." Two women stand up in the gallery. I recognize them from the case files, previous victims of the Thompson scheme. Mark's composure cracks. "You can't." "We can and we did." I step closer, lowering my voice. "Did you really think I'd let you do this to anyone else?" "Everything I did was for us," he hisses. "You ungrateful." "Mr. Thompson." The judge's voice booms through the room. "Take your seat or be removed." As security separates us, I catch Richard's expression, not anger or fear, but calculation. He whispers something to his lawyer, who immediately requests a brief recess. "They're going to offer a deal," Dad predicts. "No deals." I watch Mark being led back to his seat, remembering all the times his hands felt like safety instead of chains. They need to face everything they've done. The hearing proceeds. Each piece of evidence lands like a hammer blow: financial records, medical reports, testimony from facility staff who were paid to look the other way. With each revelation, Linda's sobs grow louder, Richard's face grows darker, and Mark stares at me with something between hatred and desperation. When it's Mom's turn to testify, her voice never wavers. She describes the psychological torture, the isolation, the calculated cruelty. Through it all, I hold her wheelchair handles, feeling the slight tremors that betray her fear. The judge's decision is swift: criminal charges will proceed against all three Thompsons. As they're led out, Mark turns back one last time. "I loved you," he says, and for the first time, I hear the truth in his voice. It's not a defense or manipulation, it's the most damning evidence of all. "I know," I reply. "That's what makes you monsters, not victims. You loved us, and you hurt us anyway." The courtroom doors close behind them with a final thud. Mom reaches for my hand, and Dad places his on my shoulder. Together, we walk out into the sunlight, leaving the shadows behind. Sometimes the best revenge isn't about destroying your enemies. It's about surviving them, and making sure they can never hurt anyone else again. The morning paper sits unopened on our new kitchen table, Mark's conviction headline waiting inside. Mom wheels past, setting down 2 coffee mugs with practiced ease. "You don't have to read it," she says. "Yes, I do." I unfold the paper slowly, scanning the details I already know. 15 years for Mark. 20 for Richard. Linda turned state's evidence, trading a lighter sentence for testimony about other victims. Claire called last night, Mom mentions, adjusting her chair beside me. The support group is growing. The support group, my unexpected legacy from this nightmare. 7 women now, all survivors of the Thompson schemes, all rebuilding their lives together. Some days we talk about healing. Some days we plot ways to protect others from predators wearing wedding rings. Dad appears in the doorway, briefcase in hand. "Ready for the foundation meeting?" The Carter Foundation for Family Justice, another unexpected outcome. Dad's way of making amends, using his legal expertise and connections to help victims of domestic abuse. My way of turning revenge into revolution. Almost. I gather the papers I've been reviewing, profiles of suspicious accidents, patterns of institutional abuse. Names of lawyers and doctors who looked the other way. Just need to finish these case files. "Sarah." Mom's hand covers mine. "You don't have to save everyone. No. I meet her eyes. But I can try. The doorbell rings, probably Claire or Maria, coming to help with research. Instead, I open the door to find Linda Thompson. She looks smaller without her designer clothes and perfect makeup. Prison orange doesn't suit her. They granted me a day release, she says quickly, before I can speak. To set things right. Mom's wheelchair squeaks behind me. Dad moves closer, protective. There are more, Linda continues. Not just Richard's victims. Other families, other schemes. I have names. I study her face, the genuine fear, the desperate need for redemption. Why now? Because you showed me something. Her hands twist together. When you chose your mother over Mark, when you fought back instead of staying quiet. You showed me what real family looks like. I think about Mark in his cell, probably still believing he acted from love. About Richard, maintaining his innocence even as evidence mounted. About all the women who weren't as lucky as me, who didn't have a father to return or a mother to fight for. Come in, I say finally. But understand something, this isn't forgiveness. I know. She steps inside, clutching her purse like a shield. It's justice. Dad leads her to the study, where our case files wait. Mom squeezes my hand as she passes, a silent reminder of how far we've come. I return to the kitchen, to the newspaper with its headlines about justice and closure. But my eyes drift to the window, to the garden Mom's planning for spring. To the wheelchair ramp Dad built himself, making up for lost time with every nail. To the empty picture frames waiting to be filled with new memories. My phone buzzes, a text from Claire, another woman came forward. Says she recognized Richard's pattern from the news. I start typing a response, but another message appears. Thank you for showing us we could fight back. That's the thing about revenge, it doesn't always look like what you expect. Sometimes it looks like a support group in a living room, sharing stories and strategies. Sometimes it looks like a father and daughter rebuilding trust over case files and coffee. Sometimes it looks like a mother learning to garden from a wheelchair, refusing to let anyone clip her wings again. And sometimes, like today, it looks like opening your door to the enemy, not for forgiveness, but because justice is bigger than any single story. I look at the empty frames on our wall, waiting to be filled. There's room for more stories, more healing, more justice. There's room for everything except the perfect lies we used to believe. Mom calls from the study, Sarah? We need your expertise here. I leave the newspaper unopened. Some headlines matter less than the work still to be done, the lives still to be saved, the truths still to be told. After all, the best revenge isn't just about ending something. It's about beginning something better.
My name's Regina, and I became a single mom when my daughter, Mia, was just 10. My ex-husband, Tom, decided he'd found greener pastures with another woman. Just like that, he was gone, leaving me to pick up the pieces of our shattered family. From that day on, it was just the two of us. I threw myself into work, determined to give Mia everything she needed. I climbed the corporate ladder, worked overtime, took on extra projects, anything to make sure my little girl wouldn't want for anything. The trauma of abandonment hit Mia hard. She became withdrawn, angry. Her grades started slipping, and she'd lash out at the slightest provocation. I was at my wit's end, trying to be both mom and dad, provider and nurturer. Finally, I decided to take her to a psychologist. Dr. Sarah was kind and patient, but even she struggled with Mia's anger. Your daughter's dealing with a lot of pain, she told me after one particularly difficult session. It's going to take time, Regina. Be patient with her. Years passed, and things got better, or so I thought. Mia seemed to be healing, growing into a beautiful, intelligent young woman. But there was an undercurrent of resentment that I couldn't quite place. It wasn't until I started trying to date again that I realized the full extent of the damage Tom had done. Every time I'd meet someone new, someone who might actually be interested in me as more than just Mia's mom, she'd fly off the handle. The first time it happened, I was blindsided. I'd been seeing Mark for a few weeks, and things were going well. He was kind, funny, and he seemed to genuinely care about me. I thought it was time for him to meet Mia. "Honey," I said one morning over breakfast. "I've invited someone over for dinner tonight. His name's Mark, and I want the two most important people in my life to know each other." She stared at me, her eyes narrowing. "Is he your boyfriend or something?" I hesitated, not sure how to answer. "We've been seeing each other, yes. But it's not serious yet. That's why I want you to meet him." "No," she said flatly. "I don't want to meet him. I don't want him in our house. Cancel the dinner." I was shocked. "Mia, sweetie, I know this might be difficult for you, but..." "Difficult?" she shouted, standing up so suddenly her chair fell backward. "You think this is difficult? You want to abandon me like he did? To start a new family and forget all about me?" She stormed out of the kitchen, leaving me alone with my cold coffee and a sinking feeling in my stomach. I should have known then that this was just the beginning. Despite Mia's outburst, I decided to go ahead with the dinner. I thought maybe if she met Mark, she'd see he wasn't a threat. God, was I wrong? Mark arrived at 7, looking nervous but eager. I introduced him to Mia, who barely looked at him. "Nice to meet you, Mia," he said, extending his hand. "Your mom's told me a lot about you." Mia ignored his hand. "I bet she has," she muttered. The tension was thick as we sat down to eat. I tried to keep the conversation light, but Mia's one-word answers and glares made it difficult. Halfway through the meal, Mark made an innocent comment about how nice it was to have a home-cooked dinner. That's when Mia exploded. "Oh, I'm sure you'd love to have this all the time, wouldn't you?" she sneered. "Playing happy families with my mom?" "Mia," I warned, but she was just getting started. "What, Mom? Isn't that what this is? You trying to replace Dad? Trying to throw me away like he did?" "That's not what this is at all," I said, my voice shaking. "I'm just trying to..." "To what? To ruin everything?" Mia stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "Well, guess what? I won't let you." Before I could react, she grabbed her plate and hurled it to the floor. The crash of breaking china was deafening in the sudden silence. "Mia," I gasped. "What are you doing?" But she wasn't listening. She grabbed another plate, then another, smashing them on the ground. Food and broken dishes were everywhere. "This is our home," she screamed. "Ours, not his." Mark stood up, looking shell-shocked. "I think I should go," he said quietly. After Mark left, Mia locked herself in her room. I spent the night cleaning up the mess, tears mixing with the soapy water as I scrubbed the floor. The next day, Mia acted like nothing had happened. But something had changed. From that day on, any attempt I made to date was met with hostility and tantrums. Years passed, and I found myself pushing away anyone who showed interest in me. It was easier than dealing with Mia's reactions. I told myself it was temporary, that once Mia was older, she'd understand. But deep down, I knew I was just making excuses. When Mia graduated high school, I was so proud. Despite everything, she'd done well in school and gotten into a good college. I thought maybe now, things would change. "Mom," she said the night before she left for college, you won't bring anyone home while I'm gone, will you?" I sighed. "Mia, honey, you're going to be living your own life now. Don't you think it's time for me to do the same?" Her face darkened. "So you are planning to replace me?" "Mia, please," I begged. "That's not fair. I've spent the last 8 years putting you first. I've given up everything for you." As soon as the words left my mouth, I knew I'd made a mistake. Mia's eyes filled with tears. "So I'm just a burden to you, is that it?" she cried. "A sacrifice you had to make?" "No, sweetie, that's not what I meant at all," I tried to backtrack, but it was too late. Mia stormed off to her room, slamming the door behind her. The next morning, she left for college without saying goodbye. With Mia away at college, I finally had a chance to rediscover myself. I started taking better care of myself, got a new haircut, bought some new clothes, even joined a gym. I reconnected with old friends, started going out more. And then I met David. He was kind, funny, and understood my situation with Mia. We started dating, and for a while, everything was perfect. But Mia, even from college, still tried to control my life. Every call, every visit home, she'd grill me about my social life. "Mom, you haven't let anyone into our house, have you?" she'd demand. I tried to reason with her. "Honey, you're living your own life now. Don't you think it's time I did the same?" But she'd get angry, threaten to drop out of college, say she couldn't focus on her studies, knowing I was replacing her. Once, after finding out about David, she called me in tears. "How could you do this to me? My grades are suffering because I'm so upset about you dating." It was exhausting, constantly walking on eggshells, trying to balance my happiness with Mia's demands. But I kept hoping things would get better once she graduated and started her own life. 4 years passed in this push and pull. Then, out of the blue, Mia called. "Mom, I'm coming home. And I'm bringing someone with me." My heart leapt. Maybe she'd finally found someone and understood why I'd wanted to date. Maybe now, things would change. When they arrived, I was shocked. Mia introduced the man beside her not as her boyfriend, but as her husband. "This is Jake," she said, a challenging look in her eyes. "We got married last week in Vegas." I couldn't believe it. My daughter was married, and I hadn't even known she was dating someone. "Mia," I gasped, "why didn't you tell me? Why wasn't I invited?" She shrugged. "We only met a few days ago. It was spontaneous." They didn't stay long. As they were leaving, I hugged Mia tightly. "I hope you'll be very happy," I whispered, trying to ignore the knot of worry in my stomach. For 6 months, I heard little from Mia. I tried to give them space, hoping they were settling into married life. Then, one rainy night, Mia showed up at my door, mascara streaking down her face. "He cheated on me," she sobbed. "I found him with another woman. We're getting divorced." Mia moved back in, quickly found a job, but showed no signs of looking for her own place. And I, remembering how she'd reacted to my attempts at independence, didn't push her. I was 46, Mia was 24, and we were settled into an uneasy coexistence when the doctor delivered the news that shattered our world. I had intestinal cancer. The diagnosis hit me like a freight train. Cancer. The word alone was terrifying. When I told Mia, she broke down in tears. "Mom," she sobbed, clinging to me, "I'll take care of you. I promise. We'll get through this together." In that moment, all our past conflicts seemed to melt away. I quit my job, thankful for the savings I'd squirreled away over the years. At least we wouldn't have to worry about money on top of everything else. The chemotherapy started, and with it came a host of new challenges. I was constantly exhausted, nauseous, and in pain. Mia took time off work to care for me, and at first, she was attentive and enthusiastic. But as the days wore on, the reality of my condition began to wear on her. The cancer had wreaked havoc on my digestive system. I struggled to use the bathroom, often needing help to clean myself afterward. It was humiliating, but I had no choice. After particularly rough chemo sessions, I'd be too weak to even make it to the toilet. I started noticing changes in Mia's behavior. The loving concern in her eyes was gradually replaced by something else, disgust. She'd wrinkle her nose when she came near me, complaining about the smell. "Mom, you stink," she'd say, not even trying to hide her revulsion. "Can't you do something about it?" I wanted to scream at her, to remind her that I was fighting for my life, that I couldn't control what the cancer and chemo were doing to my body. But I bit my tongue. She was trying, in her own way, and that had to be enough. One day, after a particularly difficult morning, Mia approached me with a determined look on her face. "Mom, I think I need to go back to work," she said, not quite meeting my eyes. "We should hire a nurse to take care of you." I nodded, trying to hide my disappointment. "I understand. We'll look into getting a nurse." The clinic where I was receiving treatment assigned a nurse named Sarah to help me at home. She was a godsend, strong, capable, and unfailingly kind. She handled my hygiene needs efficiently and without a trace of disgust. "Don't you worry, Regina," she'd say cheerfully as she helped me clean up. "We'll have you feeling fresh as a daisy in no time." With Sarah's help, my quality of life improved dramatically. But Mia wasn't happy about the arrangement. "I don't like having a stranger in our house all the time," she complained. "It's invasive." I tried to explain that Sarah was necessary for my care, but Mia wouldn't listen. Then, one evening, she dropped a bombshell. "Mom, I've been thinking," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "Maybe it would be better if you moved to a specialized care facility. I could look after the house, and you'd get round-the-clock care." I stared at her, shocked. "No, I'm not leaving my home. This is where I'm comfortable, and this is where I'm going to fight this cancer." Mia's face clouded over with anger and frustration. "Fine," she snapped. "Have it your way." As she stormed off, I felt a deep sadness settle over me. I was fighting for my life, but it felt like I was losing my daughter in the process. As the chemo treatments continued, my body waged war against itself. Each day brought new challenges, new indignities. But nothing prepared me for the day my hair started falling out in clumps. I was in the bathroom, running my fingers through my long, once beautiful hair, when a handful came away in my palm. I stared at it, numb with shock. Mia's shriek jolted me back to reality. "Mom, there's hair everywhere. I'm sick of cleaning it up." I looked at her, standing in the doorway, her face twisted in disgust and frustration. In that moment, I made a decision. "Sarah," I called weakly to my nurse. "Could you please cut my hair?" As Sarah carefully sheared away my locks, I caught sight of Mia in the mirror. Instead of offering support or comfort, she was laughing. "You look like an alien," she snickered. "Maybe you should get a wig." Her words cut deeper than any surgeon's scalpel. That night, after Sarah had gone home and Mia had retreated to her room, I cried silently into my pillow. Where had I gone wrong? How had my sweet little girl turned into this cruel stranger? Weeks passed, and I continued my battle against cancer. Every day was a struggle, but I was determined to fight. Then, one afternoon, Mia dropped another bombshell. "Mom, I'm having some friends over for my birthday next week," she announced casually. I blinked in surprise. "Here? Honey, I don't think that's a good idea." "The noise. I need rest." Mia's face hardened. "If you don't like it, you can go somewhere else for the night." "Actually, that might be better. I won't have to be embarrassed by you in front of my friends or deal with the smell." Her words hit me like a physical blow. I'd been bedridden for days, barely able to move. But in that moment, fury gave me strength. I pushed myself up, fixing her with a glare that would have made my own mother proud. "This is my house," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "If you don't like living here with me, you're welcome to leave." Mia's eyes widened in shock, then narrowed in anger. "You're so selfish," she screamed. "All you think about is yourself. You know what? It would be better for everyone if you just died already. Then you'd stop being such an inconvenience to everyone around you." The room fell silent. I stared at my daughter, unable to believe the words that had just come out of her mouth. In her eyes, I saw no trace of the little girl I'd raised, no hint of love or compassion. Just cold, hard anger. "Get out," I shouted, surprising even myself with the force in my voice. "Pack your things and get out of my house. Now." For a moment, Mia just stood there, shocked. Then, with a scream of frustration, she stormed off to her room. I could hear her throwing things into bags, slamming drawers. Minutes later, she stormed past me, bags in hand. "I hate you," she spat as she reached the door. "I wish Dad had taken me with him when he left." And then she was gone, the front door slamming behind her. She didn't even bother to close it properly. The open door mocked me, a glaring reminder of Mia's dramatic exit. I sat there, staring at it, feeling utterly drained. Finally, I reached for my phone with shaking hands and dialed my friend, Linda. "Linda," I croaked when she answered. "I need help. Can you come over?" Linda arrived in record time, concern etched on her face. She closed the door, then rushed to my side. "Regina, what happened?" The whole story poured out of me, Mia's cruelty, her harsh words, her abrupt departure. Linda listened, her face a mix of shock and anger. "Oh, Regina," she sighed when I finished. "You need to forget about that ungrateful girl and focus on yourself. You're fighting cancer, for God's sake." We talked for hours, tears flowing freely between us. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the living room, I came to a painful realization. "It's my fault," I whispered. "I raised her to be this way. I always put her needs first, ignored my own. I thought I was being a good mother, but I was just teaching her to be selfish. From now on, I'm going to be selfish. I'm going to think about myself for once." True to my word, I threw myself into my treatment with renewed vigor. Sarah, my nurse, was a godsend, helping me through the worst days with gentle care and unwavering support. 2 more rounds of chemotherapy followed. They were brutal, leaving me weak and nauseous, but I refused to give up. All the while, my phone remained silent. No calls, no texts from Mia. I tried to tell myself it was for the best, that I needed to focus on my health, but the silence hurt more than I cared to admit. Months passed. Then, during a routine checkup, my doctor smiled at me, really smiled, for the first time since my diagnosis. "The cancer's receding, Regina," he said. "You're not out of the woods yet, but this is very, very good news." I left the hospital that day feeling lighter than I had in months. The world seemed brighter somehow, full of possibilities I'd thought were lost to me forever. I was thin, almost gaunt, after months of illness. My clothes hung off me like sacks. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like myself again. I started taking short walks in the park near my house, feeling the sun on my face, the breeze in what remained of my hair. One afternoon, I stood in front of my closet, realizing none of my old clothes fit me anymore. Instead of feeling sad, I felt liberated. It was time for a change, inside and out. I spent a day sorting through my wardrobe, making piles to donate to a local homeless shelter. As I packed up bags of my old life, I felt like I was shedding more than just clothes. I was letting go of the old Regina, the one who'd let herself be walked all over, who'd put everyone else's needs before her own. Looking around my big, empty house, I realized it no longer fit the person I'd become. It was time for a change. With my savings providing a comfortable cushion, I made a bold decision: I wouldn't return to work. Instead, I'd downsize and focus on living. I contacted a realtor and put my house on the market. It sold quickly, and I found a small, cozy apartment that felt like it was made for me. It was perfect for one person, bright, manageable, and full of potential for a fresh start. I invested the remaining money from the house sale, feeling financially secure for the first time in years. Life was good, peaceful. I spent my days exploring my new neighborhood, trying new hobbies, and simply enjoying the act of being alive. Then, 3 months after I'd settled into my new life, I received an unexpected call. It was the realtor who'd handled the sale of my old house. "Mrs. Walker," he said, sounding uncomfortable, "the new owners of your old house are having some issues. They've asked for your contact information. Is it all right if I give them your number?" Curious and a little concerned, I agreed. Shortly after, my phone rang again. This time, it was the new owner, a Mr. Thompson. "Mrs. Walker," he began, his voice tense, "I'm sorry to bother you, but something strange happened today. A young woman tried to break into our house. She tried to use a key at first, then started trying to force the door open. When I confronted her, she became hysterical, screaming that this was her house, that she should inherit it after her mother's death. The blood drained from my face. Mia. It had to be Mia. She thought I was dead and had come to claim her inheritance. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Thompson," I said, my voice shaking. I think that might have been my daughter. We'd been estranged. She must have assumed." "Your daughter?" He sounded shocked. "But she said you were dead." "I've been very ill, we haven't spoken in months," I explained, not wanting to go into details. "Mr. Thompson, could I ask a favor? If she comes back, would you call me?" He agreed, and we ended the call. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to continue with my new, peaceful life. But I knew I couldn't. This confrontation had been coming for a long time. It was time to face Mia, to finally say all the things I should have said years ago. The call came sooner than I expected. Just a day after my conversation with Mr. Thompson, my phone rang. "She's here," Mr. Thompson said, his voice tense. "And she's causing quite a scene." I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what was to come. "I'm on my way." The drive to my old house felt surreal. As I pulled up, I could hear the shouting before I even got out of the car. Mia's voice, shrill and angry, carried across the yard. "This is my house," she was screaming at the Thompsons, who stood on the porch looking shocked and frightened. "Get out now." I stepped out of my car, and for a moment, the world seemed to freeze. Mia turned, her eyes landing on me. The look of shock on her face quickly morphed into one of fury. "You," she spat. "You're supposed to be dead." I felt a calm settle over me, a stark contrast to the chaos unfolding around us. "I'm sorry to disappoint you, Mia," I said, my voice steady. Mia's face contorted with rage. "What's going on? Why are these people in our house?" "It's not our house anymore, Mia," I explained. "I sold it." Her eyes widened in disbelief, then narrowed in anger. "You can't do that. It was supposed to be mine. I was supposed to inherit it when you died." I couldn't help but let out a bitter laugh. "I'm sorry I inconvenienced you by surviving." Mia's face turned red. "You don't understand. I have debts, I need money." I shook my head, acutely aware of the Thompsons and the small crowd of neighbors who had gathered to watch the spectacle. "I don't owe you anything, Mia. You abandoned me when I was fighting for my life. You wished me dead. Why should I help you now?" "Because you're my mother," she screamed. "You're supposed to take care of me." I felt a sadness wash over me, but I stood my ground. "No, Mia, not anymore. You're an adult. Your choices, your consequences." Mia's face twisted into an ugly sneer. "You know what? Dad was right to leave you. You're useless. It would have been better if you had died." Her words hung in the air, shocking even the onlookers into silence. But this time, they didn't cut me to the core. This time, I felt only pity for the angry, bitter woman my daughter had become. Without another word, I turned and walked back to my car. Before getting in, I addressed the Thompsons. "If she comes back or tries to break in again, call the police," I said, gesturing towards Mia. "She has no right to be here." As I drove away, I caught a last glimpse of Mia in my rearview mirror, her face a mask of shock and fury. But for the first time, her anger didn't touch me. I was free. In the months that followed, I embraced my new life fully. I took up painting, finding joy in splashing colors across canvas. My health continued to improve, and each day I felt stronger, more alive. Mia never called or tried to contact me again. Sometimes I felt a pang of sadness for the relationship we'd lost, but mostly I felt relief. I had spent so many years trying to fill the bottomless pit of her needs. Now, finally, I was living for myself. Isabella Martinez, that's my name. I never knew my dad, but honestly, I didn't feel like I was missing out on much. Mom worked her ass off to keep food on the table and a roof over our heads. From as early as I can remember, I was helping around the house. Dishes, laundry, you name it. Mom always said, "Bella, you gotta learn to take care of yourself. The world ain't gonna do it for you." Those words stuck with me. Our apartment was small, but it was home. The sound of Mom's ancient sewing machine was the soundtrack to my childhood. She'd stay up late, mending clothes for extra cash. I'd often fall asleep to its rhythmic hum. What did I like? Computers. It started when our school got a bunch of donated PCs. Most kids used them for games, but I was fascinated by what made them tick. I'd stay after school, tinkering, learning. One day, Mr. Johnson, the IT teacher, caught me trying to install some video editing software. "What are you up to, Isabella?" he asked, eyebrow raised. I froze, thinking I was in trouble. I just wanted to learn how to edit videos. Instead of getting mad, he smiled. "Well, why didn't you say so? Let me show you a few tricks." From then on, every Tuesday and Thursday after school, Mr. Johnson would teach me the ins and outs of video editing. At home, I'd practice on our old, wheezing computer. As high school graduation approached, reality hit hard. College wasn't in the cards for me. The day after graduation, I marched into WKLP, our local TV station. The receptionist looked at me like I was crazy when I asked about job openings, but pointed me towards the HR office. 3 interviews and 1 practical test later, I had my first real job. Assistant video editor. The pay wasn't great, but it was a start. For the next 2 years, I worked my ass off. Weekdays at the station, weekends doing freelance gigs. Every penny I could spare went into my college fund. It was exhausting, but I was determined. Then, on a rare night out with Lisa and Carlos, everything changed. We were at this house party, some friend of a friend thing. That's where I met him, Ryan Thompson. He wasn't what you'd call classically handsome. Kinda nerdy, with thick-rimmed glasses and a slightly crooked smile. But when he started talking about his work in software development, his whole face lit up. I was intrigued. As the party wound down, Ryan asked for my number. I hesitated for a second, then thought, what the hell, and gave it to him. The next few months were like a whirlwind. Ryan and I started dating, and it was nice. Different from what I expected, but in a good way. One night, as we were walking home from a movie, Ryan proposed to me, and I agreed. The wedding was small but beautiful. My mom cried happy tears, and Ryan's parents, Linda and Robert, well, they surprised me. I'd been nervous about meeting them, given the whole wealthy family thing. But they were warm and welcoming from the start. The first 2 years of our marriage were good. Not perfect, but good. We had our own place, a cozy apartment not far from the TV station where I still worked. Ryan had his job at some big tech firm, and things were comfortable. We traveled a bit, mostly weekend trips around the country. It was more than I'd ever done growing up, and I loved every minute of it. Seeing new places, trying new foods, it was like a whole new world had opened up to me. But then, things started to change. It started with the little things. Ryan would sigh when I talked about work, or roll his eyes when I got excited about a new editing technique I'd learned. Then more. The first time he made an excuse not to take me to a work party, I didn't think much of it. "It's just a boring office thing," he said. "You wouldn't enjoy it." But then it happened again and again. One night, I overheard him on the phone with a coworker. "Yeah, just me tonight. You know how it is. Bella's not really into these kinds of events." I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. Not into these events? He'd never even given me a chance. That night, I confronted him. "Ryan, why don't you want me to come to your work events anymore?" "So you're ashamed of me?" "No, it's not that. It's just, sometimes it's hard for you to keep up with the conversations, you know? I don't want you to feel out of place." His words stung, but a part of me wondered if he was right. Maybe I did need to step up my game. So, I made a decision. I was going to go back to school. I enrolled in night classes at the local community college, studying information technology. It was tough, balancing work and school and my marriage, but I was determined to make it work. But even as I worked my ass off to improve myself, things with Ryan kept getting worse. The cold shoulder turned into open contempt. The man I married seemed to be disappearing before my eyes, replaced by someone I barely recognized. And then came the night that changed everything. I'd just gotten home from a late class, exhausted but feeling good about acing a test. Ryan was in the living room, a glass of whiskey in his hand. "Where have you been?" he demanded. "Class, remember? I told you I had a big test tonight." He scoffed. "You're a fool and a hillbilly, Bella. And no amount of schooling is going to change that." I felt like I'd been slapped. But before I could respond, I heard a gasp from the doorway. Linda and Robert was standing there, a look of horror on their faces. Linda leaned forward, her eyes flashing. "How dare you talk to your wife like that? Ryan, we raised you better than this." "You don't understand," Ryan said, his voice rising. "Do you know how embarrassing it is to have a wife who can't even keep up with basic conversations at work events?" I flinched, but Robert's next words shocked us all into silence. "Embarrassing?" he thundered. "Let me tell you about embarrassing, boy. Your grandfather, my father, didn't have a lick of formal education. He was born in the poorest part of town, worked his fingers to the bone to give me a better life. So don't you dare sit there and act like you're some kind of aristocrat." I felt a rush of warmth towards my in-laws, but Ryan's next words froze it in its tracks. "I'll behave how I see fit," he spat. "This is my life, my marriage." After his parents left, Ryan started going away more often. "Weekend trips with friends," he'd say, not even bothering to invite me anymore. I threw myself into work and school, taking on extra weekend gigs to fill the lonely hours. Then, my mom got sick. Cancer, the doctors said. It was aggressive, and within months, she was gone. I felt lost, adrift without my anchor. Ryan was barely there, offering awkward pats on the back instead of the comfort I craved. In my grief, I found myself turning to Linda more and more. She'd call to check on me, invite me over for tea, just sit and talk with me for hours. It was the motherly comfort I desperately needed. But this only seemed to infuriate Ryan more. One night, after I'd spent the afternoon at his parents' house, he exploded. "Why are you always over there?" he yelled. "Are you trying to turn my parents against me?" I was stunned. "What? No, Ryan. I needed someone to talk to." I went to bed that night with tears in my eyes, wondering how things had gone so wrong. A few weeks later, I started feeling off. Exhausted all the time, nauseous in the mornings. At first, I chalked it up to stress and grief. But as the symptoms persisted, a different possibility started to form in my mind. I bought a pregnancy test on my way home from work one day, my heart pounding as I waited for the results. When those two lines appeared, I felt a mix of joy and terror. A baby. We were having a baby. That night, I waited nervously for Ryan to come home. When he finally walked through the door, I took a deep breath. "Ryan, we need to talk. I'm pregnant." The look on his face wasn't joy, or even surprise. It was pure fury. "Pregnant?" he spat. "Are you kidding me? We can't have a baby now. Get an abortion, Bella. That's final." I fled the apartment, tears streaming down my face. Without thinking, I found myself at Linda and Robert's doorstep. When Linda opened the door and saw my face, she immediately pulled me into a hug. Through my sobs, I told them everything. About the pregnancy, about Ryan's reaction. I've never seen Robert look so angry, or Linda so determined. "You listen to me, Isabella," Linda said, holding my face in her hands. "This is your decision. If you want this baby, we'll support you every step of the way. Ryan be damned." The next few months were a blur of doctor's appointments, work, and growing tension at home. Ryan barely spoke to me, spending most of his time out with friends. I focused on my job, squirreling away every extra penny I could for the baby. One afternoon, I had a doctor's appointment to get some routine tests done. I'd taken half a day off work and was looking forward to a quiet evening at home afterward. As I pulled into our apartment complex, I noticed Ryan's car in the parking lot. Strange, he was usually at work at this hour. I climbed the stairs to our apartment, fumbling with my keys. As I opened the door, I heard Ryan's voice. "I'll be there in a minute, babe. Just grabbing my overnight bag." My heart started racing. I stepped inside, and there was Ryan, packing a suitcase. "Who were you talking to? Where are you going?" Before he could answer, I heard a car horn honk outside. Ryan cursed under his breath and grabbed his bag. "I don't have time for this. We'll talk when I get back." I followed him down to the parking lot, demanding answers. And that's when I saw her. Sitting in the passenger seat of Ryan's car was a woman. She was beautiful, with long blonde hair and perfect makeup. And she was very, very pregnant. As I stood there, frozen in shock, she got out of the car. She walked towards me with a smug smile on her face. "So, you must be Isabella," she said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "I'm Melissa, Ryan's girlfriend." I turned to Ryan, who couldn't even meet my eyes. "Is this true?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He nodded, still not looking at me. I felt a surge of anger and disgust. "Aren't you ashamed?" I asked Melissa, my voice shaking. "He's married. We're having a baby too." Melissa's smile turned cold. "Ashamed? No, honey, I had to fight for my happiness, and you've already lost this battle. It's not my fault you couldn't keep your man satisfied." I turned to Ryan, fury replacing my shock. "How could you do this? To me, to our baby?" He finally looked at me, his face a mask of indifference. "Come on, Bella, we both know this marriage was a mistake. I never loved you. You were convenient. A good housekeeper, someone to keep the bed warm. But Melissa, she's my soulmate. She's smart, educated. She fits into my world." Each word was like a knife in my heart. I stood there, tears streaming down my face, as Ryan got into the car with Melissa. "I'll be back on Monday to get the rest of my things," he said. "We can talk about the divorce then." As they drove away, I sank to my knees in the parking lot, my world crumbling around me. I picked up my phone with shaking hands and dialed Linda's number. When they arrived at my apartment that night, Linda took one look at my tear-stained face and pulled me into a fierce hug. I listened, numb, as Robert berated Ryan over the speakerphone. His words were sharp, cutting. "How dare you treat your wife this way," he thundered. "The woman carrying your child." Ryan's voice came through, defensive and cold. "Dad, you don't understand. Melissa is..." "Don't you dare mention that woman's name," Linda cut in. "We will never accept her, do you hear me? Never." There was a pause, then Ryan's voice, eerily calm. "Fine, I don't need your acceptance. I don't need you at all, I have Melissa now, and that's all I need." The next few months were a whirlwind. With Linda and Robert's help, I found a small apartment closer to them. The divorce proceedings were ugly, with Ryan fighting me every step of the way. But in the end, it was done. I was free of him, at least legally. When my daughter, Sophia, was born on a crisp autumn morning, it was Linda who held my hand through the labor. Robert paced the waiting room, every bit the nervous grandfather. Ryan refused to even see Sophia. When I took him to court for child support, he had the audacity to demand a paternity test. I agreed, knowing the truth. The results came back, confirming what I already knew: Sophia was his. The court ordered him to pay alimony, but I knew better than to count on his support. The years that followed were challenging, but also filled with unexpected joy. I threw myself into my studies, finally earning my degree in information technology. At work, my dedication paid off with a promotion to senior editor. But the real blessings were Linda and Robert. They embraced their role as grandparents with a fervor that sometimes brought tears to my eyes. Weekends were filled with trips to the park, family dinners, and impromptu movie nights. They were the family I'd always dreamed of, and Sophia adored them. 5 years flew by in a blur of bedtime stories, scraped knees, and proud moments. Sophia was growing into a smart, kind little girl, with her grandmother's smile and her grandfather's curiosity. Then, one ordinary Tuesday, everything changed again. Robert collapsed at home. The diagnosis was grim: advanced pancreatic cancer. The doctors gave him months, maybe weeks. I threw myself into helping Linda care for him. Work, Sophia, my own needs, everything took a back seat. Robert had been more of a father to me than my own had ever been, and I was determined to be there for him until the end. Despite our best efforts, despite the treatments and the prayers, Robert slipped away from us 3 months later. I held Linda as she wept, feeling as though I'd lost my own father. At the funeral, I stood between Linda and Sophia, our hands linked. Ryan didn't show up. I hadn't really expected him to, but his absence was a stark reminder of how far he'd fallen. As the weeks passed, Linda's health began to decline rapidly. The loss of Robert seemed to have drained her will to live. She became frail, often confused, and prone to long bouts of silence. The solution came to me that night as I lay awake, worrying. The next morning, I called my boss and arranged to work remotely. Then I packed up Sophia and our essentials and moved into Linda's house. Our new routine took some adjusting. I hired a nurse to care for Linda during the mornings while I worked on my video editing projects. In the afternoons, Sophia and I would take over. We'd read to Linda, help her with her physical therapy exercises, or simply sit and reminisce about happier times. Weeks turned into months. Linda had good days and bad days. On the good days, we'd sit in the garden, enjoying the sunshine and each other's company. On the bad days, I'd hold her hand as she cried for Robert, for the son she'd lost long before his father's death. One sunny afternoon, Sophia and I returned from a walk to find a man in a crisp business suit leaving the house. My heart raced, fearing the worst. "Linda?" I called out as we entered. "Is everything okay?" She was sitting in her favorite armchair, looking tired but composed. "Everything's fine, dear." That was just Mr. Harrison, my lawyer. I needed to discuss some legal matters with him. I nodded, not pressing for details. If Linda wanted to share, she would. "All right, how about some tea?" 3 weeks later, Linda passed away in her sleep. With shaking hands, I dialed Ryan's number. When he answered, I struggled to keep my voice steady. "Ryan, it's Isabella. Your mother passed away this morning." There was a long pause, then Ryan's voice, cold and detached. "Well, I can't say I'm surprised or particularly upset. That woman made her choices. Look, I'm not coming to the funeral. Just let me know when the will reading is scheduled." On the day of the funeral, the church was packed. Linda had touched so many lives, and it showed. As I stood at the pulpit to deliver the eulogy, with Sophia holding my hand, I looked out at the sea of faces. Friends, neighbors, colleagues, all there to say goodbye to a woman who had loved so fiercely and been loved in return. Ryan's absence was a palpable void, a reminder of the tragedy that had torn this family apart. But as I began to speak, sharing memories of Linda's kindness, her strength, her unwavering love, I realized something profound. Family isn't always about blood. Sometimes, it's about choice. And Linda had chosen to love me, to love Sophia, even when her own son had turned his back on us all. As we laid Linda to rest beside Robert, I made a silent promise. I would honor her memory by living with the same love and grace she had shown me. And I would make sure Sophia grew up knowing the incredible grandparents she had been blessed with, even if their time together had been all too brief. A few days after we laid Linda to rest, I received a call from Mr. Harrison, Linda's lawyer. "Mrs. Thompson, it's time to read the will." Can you come to my office tomorrow at 10 a.m.? I've already contacted Mr. Thompson. He'll be there. The next morning, I arrived at the law office, my stomach in knots. I took a deep breath and walked in. Ryan was there with Melissa, both dressed expensively and wearing matching scowls. Melissa's eyes raked over me, her lip curling in disdain. "Let's begin," Mr. Harrison said, opening a folder. As he read, I watched Ryan's face. At first, he looked bored, then confused, and finally, as realization dawned, furious. "This can't be right," he interrupted. "Read it again." Mr. Harrison sighed. "Mr. Thompson, it's quite clear. Your mother has left all her property, including the house, to Isabella Thompson and her daughter, Sophia." Ryan rounded on me. "You," he snarled. "You manipulated my mother, you gold-digging scum. Well, enjoy it while you can. I'm kicking you out of that house today." As they stormed out, Melissa paused at the door. "You might have won this round," she hissed, "but trust me, we're not done." I sat there, shell-shocked, as Mr. Harrison explained the details of the will. It wasn't just the house. Linda had left everything to Sophia and me, her savings, her investments, everything. "She wanted to ensure you and Sophia would be taken care of," Mr. Harrison said gently. "Linda loved you both very much." Tears welled up in my eyes. Even after she was gone, Linda was still looking out for us. But Ryan was true to his word. The harassment started that very night, incessant phone calls, threats, promises to destroy me. I changed my number, but it didn't stop. Then came the intimidation. Men would approach us on the street, making vague threats about paying what we owed. Sophia was terrified, clinging to me whenever we left the house. One day, as a man was making his usual threats, I discreetly hit record on my phone. As soon as he left, I went straight to the police station. The investigation moved quickly. With my recording and testimony, along with statements from neighbors who had witnessed the harassment, the police built a solid case against Ryan. When confronted with the evidence, Ryan's hired thugs quickly turned on him, confirming he had paid them to scare us. I'll never forget the look on Ryan's face when the officer slapped the handcuffs on him. In the end, I was granted a restraining order against Ryan. He wasn't allowed within 500 feet of Sophia or me, or to contact us in any way. That night, as I tucked Sophia into bed, I looked around the room that had once been Linda's sewing room. Now it was filled with stuffed animals and children's books, a testament to the new life we were building. "Grandma and Grandpa are watching over us," Sophia mumbled sleepily, clutching the teddy bear Robert had given her on her 3rd birthday. "Yes, they are," I whispered, kissing her forehead. "And they'd be so proud of you, my brave girl." Life had finally settled into a peaceful rhythm. Sophia was thriving in school, and I had recently been promoted to deputy director at the TV station. Linda and Robert's legacy had given us security, but I was determined to build our own success. One sunny afternoon, as I left work, a familiar figure stepped out from behind a parked car. Melissa, Ryan's wife, looked nothing like the polished woman I remembered. Her hair was disheveled, her eyes red-rimmed. "Isabella, please," she said, her voice breaking. "I need your help." I tensed, ready for another confrontation, but her next words caught me off guard. "Our son is sick. He needs surgery. Please, we need money. Just half of the inheritance." "You don't need it all, do you?" Something felt off. "What's wrong with him?" I asked cautiously. Melissa's eyes darted around. It's his heart. No, his kidneys. The doctors say." As she fumbled through her explanation, I remembered our first encounter, her smug smile as she declared victory in our battle. A cold clarity washed over me. "You know, Melissa," I said calmly, "someone once told me that I had to fight for my happiness. And it looks like you've already lost this battle." Her face transformed, the mask of desperation replaced by fury. "You scum," she spat. "You owe us that money. It should have been ours." I stood my ground. "I don't owe you anything." Now leave or I'm calling the police." As I walked away, her curses fading behind me, I felt a sense of closure. The last tie to my old life had been severed. That night, I made a decision. It was time for a fresh start. I sold Linda's house and bought a new one in a different neighborhood. Somewhere Ryan and Melissa wouldn't find us. Now, as I sit in our new living room, watching Sophia do her homework, I'm filled with gratitude. Gratitude for Linda and Robert, who loved us unconditionally. Gratitude for the strength I found within myself. And yes, even gratitude for the hardships that led me here. My name's Sarah, and I've got a story to tell you. I grew up in a military family, just me and my dad. Mom couldn't handle the stress of constant moves and took off after I was born. Dad, bless him, did his best, but he was always away on duty. So, I ended up living with my grandmother for most of my early years. When I was about 3, Dad remarried. A year later, my half-sister, Emily, came along. I didn't see much of them at first, still living with Grandma and all. But things changed when I turned 10. Dad retired from the military, got a fat pension, and bought a house. He came to get me, saying it was time for us to be a proper family. I was excited at first. A new house, a new family, it seemed like a dream come true. But reality hit hard and fast. My stepmom, Linda, was okay, I guess. She tried to make me feel welcome, but it was clear Emily was her priority. And Emily? Well, she was a nightmare from day one. "That's my room," she screamed when Dad showed me to my new bedroom. "I want it. Make her sleep in the attic." Dad tried to calm her down. "Emily, honey, there's plenty of space for both of you. Sarah needs a room too." But Emily wasn't having it. She threw herself on the floor, kicking and screaming. I stood there, suitcase in hand, feeling like an intruder in what was supposed to be my home. That was just the beginning. Emily made it her mission to make my life hell. She'd accidentally spill juice on my homework, draw on my textbooks, and hide my things. I learned pretty quick that in this house, Emily could do no wrong. No matter what she did, it was always, "Sarah, be the bigger person," or "Sarah, you need to set a good example." So, I stopped complaining. I learned to hide my important stuff and ignore Emily's antics as best I could. But it wasn't just Emily making things tough. When I was 12, the doctor dropped a bombshell on us. I had problems with my thyroid, hyperfunction, he called it. He said I'd live a normal life, but having kids would probably be off the table. I remember sitting in that sterile office, the words washing over me like ice water. Dad squeezed my hand, trying to comfort me, but I felt numb. At 12, having kids wasn't exactly on my radar, but knowing it might never happen? That hit hard. Emily, being the brat she was, overheard and started calling me empty nut. It stung, but I tried not to let it show. I buried myself in my computer games, finding solace in virtual worlds where I could be anyone, do anything. Life trudged on, and before I knew it, I was 16. That's when everything changed again. Grandma passed away, leaving me her inheritance. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough to make Emily's eyes go wide with envy. "It's not fair," she whined at the dinner table. "Why does Sarah get all the money? We should use it for a family vacation." Dad backed me up, surprisingly. "Emily, that's Sarah's inheritance. She can decide what to do with it." I had plans for that money. All those hours spent gaming hadn't just been an escape, they'd given me an idea. I wanted to open a network of computer clubs for teenagers, maybe even a camp for training esports athletes. A place where kids like me could feel at home, surrounded by people who got it. When I shared my idea, Emily laughed so hard she nearly choked on her peas. "That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. Who'd want to go to a nerd camp?" "It's not dumb," I shot back. "Esports is growing. It could be big. High school graduation couldn't come fast enough. College was a breath of fresh air. For the first time, I could just be Sarah, not the girl with the annoying sister, or the one who couldn't have kids. I threw myself into my studies, focusing on business management. All the while, my dream of the esports camp simmered in the back of my mind. After graduation, I took a leap of faith. I packed my bags and headed to South Korea for an internship. If I was going to learn about esports, why not go to the Mecca? Those 3 years in Korea were intense. I worked my ass off, learning everything I could about running gaming centers and managing teams. I saw firsthand how esports could change lives, giving kids a sense of purpose and belonging. When I finally came back home, I was ready. I used grandma's money to rent a small space and turned it into my first computer club. It wasn't much, just a dozen computers and some second-hand furniture, but it was mine. The first few months were tough. Some days, I'd sit there alone, wondering if I'd made a huge mistake. But slowly, word spread. Kids started trickling in after school, then flooding in on weekends. 5 years flew by in a blur of expansion, tournaments, and sleepless nights. Before I knew it, I had 5 thriving clubs and a full-fledged training camp for aspiring esports athletes. My team was racking up wins left and right. I was so focused on work that dating wasn't even on my radar. But life has a funny way of surprising you when you least expect it. It was at a gaming convention. I was there scouting new talent when I quite literally ran into him. Coffee went flying, splattering both our shirts. "Oh God, I'm so sorry," I stammered, frantically grabbing napkins. He just laughed, his green eyes crinkling at the corners. "No worries. I needed a wake-up call anyway. I'm Jake." "Sarah," I replied, feeling my cheeks heat up. We ended up talking for hours, long after our shirts had dried. Jake was a game developer, passionate about creating educational games for kids. He got my vision for the clubs in a way few others had. As we said goodbye, he hesitated. "Listen, Sarah, would you maybe want to grab coffee sometime? Preferably without wearing it?" Our coffee date turned into dinner, then weekend trips, and before I knew it, a year had flown by. He was different from anyone I'd ever met, supportive, kind, and he actually listened when I talked about my work. One night, over a homemade dinner, Jake got down on one knee. I was overjoyed, but a nagging voice in the back of my head wouldn't let me fully embrace the moment. "Jake, wait," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "There's something you need to know." I told him about my thyroid condition, about the likelihood that we'd never have children. I held my breath, waiting for his reaction. Jake just smiled and took my hands in his. "Sarah, I love you. Kids or no kids, I want to spend my life with you. We'll face whatever comes together." Tears welled up in my eyes as I nodded, too choked up to speak. He slipped the ring on my finger, and just like that, we were engaged. When we went to tell my family, I was a bundle of nerves. Dad was thrilled, of course. He clapped Jake on the back so hard I thought he might knock him over. "Welcome to the family, son," he boomed. Linda offered a tight smile and a quick hug. "And Emily?" She didn't even bother to come downstairs to meet Jake. I could hear her music blasting from her room, a clear message that she couldn't care less about my engagement. The wedding ceremony was perfect, simple, heartfelt, surrounded by our closest friends and colleagues. As we exchanged vows, I felt like my heart might burst with happiness. At the reception, I scanned the room, a small part of me still hoping to see Emily. Instead, a waiter approached with a large, beautifully wrapped box. "A delivery for the bride," he announced. The sender said to open it in front of everyone. My heart skipped a beat. Could this be Emily's way of making amends? Hopeful, I tore into the wrapping paper. But as I lifted the lid, my blood ran cold. Inside were baby clothes, tiny onesies, booties, and bibs. The room fell silent. I could feel everyone's eyes on me, could almost hear the whispers starting. Jake was at my side in an instant, his arm around my waist. "What's wrong?" he asked, concern etched on his face. I couldn't speak. Tears stung my eyes as the realization hit me: this wasn't an olive branch. It was a deliberate, cruel reminder of what I couldn't have. Jake took one look in the box and understood. His jaw clenched, but his voice was gentle when he spoke to our guests. "Looks like someone jumped the gun on baby gifts," he said with a forced laugh. "How about we get back to the dancing?" As I danced with Jake, laughed with our friends, a small part of me couldn't help but wonder, would I ever truly be free of my sister's shadow? The years after the wedding flew by in a whirlwind of work and ambition. I threw myself into expanding my business, driven by a mix of passion and, if I'm honest, the need to prove myself. Those computer clubs I dreamed of? They were thriving. But the real jewel in my crown was the esports training camp. I spent more and more time at the camp, coaching and mentoring. It was incredible to watch these kids grow, not just in their gaming skills, but in confidence and teamwork too. But while my professional life was soaring, my personal life was complicated. Every visit to my parents' house felt like walking into a minefield. Emily's hostility hadn't lessened over the years; if anything, it had intensified. She'd make snide comments about how I'd stolen Grandma's money, how I was getting rich off her inheritance. "Must be nice," she'd sneer, living it up while the rest of us struggle. I tried to brush it off, but her words stung. "Emily, I worked hard for everything I have," I'd say, trying to keep my voice level. "Grandma's money just gave me a start." But she'd just roll her eyes and mutter something about how I always got everything handed to me. Dad and Linda would try to intervene, to smooth things over, but it was useless. The rift between us just kept growing. I started avoiding family gatherings when I could. It was easier to make excuses about work than to deal with Emily's constant jabs. Jake was my rock through it all, always ready with a hug and a reminder that I didn't need to prove anything to anyone. "You're amazing," he'd tell me, his eyes full of love. "Don't let anyone make you doubt that." But there was one doubt that kept creeping in, no matter how hard I tried to ignore it. Kids. We'd been trying for a while now, hoping against hope that the doctors had been wrong. Each month brought a new wave of disappointment. I remember sitting on the bathroom floor one night, staring at yet another negative pregnancy test. Jake found me there, silent tears streaming down my face. "Hey," he said softly, sliding down to sit beside me. "It's okay. We knew this might happen, remember?" I nodded, unable to speak. He pulled me into his arms, and I let myself break down. "I just wanted to prove them wrong," I sobbed. "To show that I could have it all, the career, the family." Jake stroked my hair gently. "Sarah, listen to me. You are not defined by whether or not you can have kids. You're changing lives every day with your work. You're building a legacy that goes beyond biology." His words helped, but the ache remained. We talked about other options, adoption, surrogacy, but for now, we decided to focus on our life together and my growing business. 10 years. It hardly seemed possible that a decade had passed since I opened my first computer club. As the anniversary approached, I decided it was time for a celebration, not just of my success, but of all the kids whose lives had been touched by our programs. I spared no expense for the party. The main hall of our flagship camp was transformed into a glittering wonderland of tech-themed decorations. Gaming stations were set up alongside a lavish buffet, blending the world of esports with classic party elements. The guests started arriving, current and former students, parents, industry colleagues, even a few local celebrities who'd taken an interest in our work. I plastered on my best hostess smile, greeting everyone warmly. Then I saw Emily. My heart dropped to my stomach. What was she doing here? I certainly hadn't invited her. She was arm in arm with a guy I didn't recognize, probably her latest boyfriend. To my surprise, she seemed subdued. No snide remarks, no eye rolling. Just a quiet congratulations as she passed by. I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. Maybe, just maybe, we could get through this evening without incident. The party was in full swing. Kids were showing their parents their favorite games, business contacts were being made over hors d'oeuvres, and the general buzz of excitement filled the air. I was just starting to relax when I saw Emily making her way to the stage. My blood ran cold. What was she doing? Before I could react, she had grabbed the microphone. "Excuse me, everyone. I have something to say." The room fell silent. All eyes turned to Emily. "I know we're here to celebrate my sister's success," she began, her voice sickly sweet. "But I think it's important that you all know the truth." I felt rooted to the spot, unable to move or speak. "Parents, do you really want your children spending time in a place run by someone who can't possibly understand their needs?" Emily's eyes found mine in the crowd, a cruel glint in them. "My sister can't have children of her own. How can a childless woman truly know what's best for your kids?" Gasps and murmurs rippled through the crowd. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. Emily wasn't done. "I, on the other hand, am pregnant." She paused, letting that sink in. "And I'm opening my own esports camp. One run by someone who actually understands children, who will experience the joys and challenges of parenthood firsthand." I stood there, shell-shocked, as Emily's words hung in the air. The room felt like it was closing in on me. Years of buried pain about my infertility came rushing back, threatening to overwhelm me. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Thank God for Jake. He was at my side in an instant, his arm around my waist, steadying me. "Let's get some air," he murmured, but I shook my head. I couldn't let them see me run away. Jake squeezed my hand and turned to address the crowd. "Well, folks, how about we lighten the mood? I hear the chefs have outdone themselves with the dessert spread. Why don't we all head over for a tasting?" As the murmuring crowd moved towards the buffet, I slipped away to a quiet corner. My hand shook as I pulled out my phone, seeing notification after notification popping up. Our live stream. I'd completely forgotten about it in the chaos. Comments were flooding in. Some were supportive. "What that woman did was disgusting. Sarah, you're an inspiration. Having kids doesn't make you a good mentor. Sarah's track record speaks for itself." But others were brutal. "How can she run a camp for kids when she can't even have her own? I wouldn't want my child around someone so unnatural." The rest of the evening passed in a blur. I pasted on a smile and made small talk when necessary, but inside, I was crumbling. Jake handled most of it, smoothly covering for me when I fell silent or lost track of conversations. Just when I thought the night couldn't get any worse, chaos erupted near the exit. There was a scream, then a thud. I rushed over to see what had happened. My heart stopped. Emily was sprawled at the bottom of the stairs, clutching her stomach, her face contorted in pain. Her boyfriend was kneeling beside her, panic written all over his face. "Someone call an ambulance," he shouted. As he helped Emily to her feet, her eyes locked onto mine. The hatred I saw there chilled me to the bone. "You," she shrieked, pointing a shaking finger at me. "You did this. You pushed me." I recoiled, shocked. "What? No, I didn't, I wasn't even near." But Emily wasn't listening. As her boyfriend started to lead her out, she kept screaming. "You're jealous of my baby. You couldn't stand that I can have what you can't." Her words cut deep, reopening wounds I thought had long since healed. I stood there, frozen, as they disappeared through the doors. The remaining guests were staring, some with suspicion, others with pity. I felt exposed, raw, like my deepest insecurities had been laid bare for all to see. The morning after the party, I was nursing a cup of coffee, trying to make sense of the previous night's chaos, when there was a knock at the door. Jake answered it, and I heard low, serious voices. My stomach dropped. "Sarah?" Jake called, his voice tight. "There's a police officer here to see you." I walked to the door on shaky legs. The officer, a stern-faced woman, introduced herself as Detective Martinez. "Mrs. Thompson, I'm here about the incident involving your sister last night," she said. "She's filed a complaint against you. She's lost the baby, and is accusing you of pushing her down the stairs." Jake stepped in, his lawyer instincts kicking in. We have a full recording of the event. It was being live-streamed. We spent the next few hours going over everything with Detective Martinez. I provided the live-stream footage, the guest list, statements from staff and guests. By the end, I was exhausted but hopeful. Surely, with all this evidence, they'd see I was innocent. A few days later, Detective Martinez called. "Mrs. Thompson, we've concluded our investigation," she said. "You've been cleared of all suspicion." Relief washed over me, but it was short-lived. "We've identified the actual perpetrator," she continued. "It was your sister's boyfriend, Mark Stevens. We have clear video evidence of him pushing her." I felt sick. But why? He confessed during questioning, Detective Martinez explained. "Apparently, he didn't want to marry your sister or have a child with her. He claimed she was forcing him into marriage by threatening to create a scandal. Your sister has been informed of the findings." I thanked her and hung up, feeling numb. It was over. I was cleared. But why didn't I feel relieved? The answer came in the form of a vitriolic voicemail from Emily later that day. "This is all your fault," her voice screeched through the speaker. "If you hadn't upset me so much at that stupid party, Mark wouldn't have felt pressured to do this. You're the reason I lost my baby." I listened, dumbfounded, as she ranted on, spinning increasingly illogical reasons why I was to blame. According to Emily, I had somehow manipulated Mark into pushing her. I had created such a stressful environment that it drove him to it. On and on she went, each accusation more outlandish than the last. The fallout from Emily's accusations didn't stop with her voicemail. A few days later, I got a call from Dad. His voice was heavy, tired. "Sarah, honey," he said, "I don't know how to tell you this, but Linda's taken Emily's side in all this." I closed my eyes, feeling a fresh wave of pain wash over me. "What do you mean, Dad?" He sighed deeply. She says you're not welcome in the house anymore. That you've caused enough trouble." The words hit me like a physical blow. I'd never been close to Linda, but to be outright banned from my childhood home? It hurt more than I expected. "I'm so sorry, sweet pea," Dad continued, his voice cracking. "I want you to know, I don't agree with any of this. I know you're innocent. I've tried talking to them, but..." "It's okay, Dad," I said, even though it wasn't. "You don't have to choose sides." But apparently, he already had. Over the next few weeks, I heard from him regularly. He and Linda were fighting constantly. She couldn't understand why he wouldn't condemn me, why he insisted on maintaining a relationship with his troublemaker daughter. It all came to a head about a month after the party incident. Dad called, sounding more resolved than I'd heard him in years. "I'm divorcing Linda," he said without preamble. "I can't do this anymore, Sarah. I won't choose between my daughters, and I won't live with someone who asks me to." I felt a mix of guilt and relief. "Dad, you don't have to do this. I don't want to break up your marriage." "You're not," he assured me. "This has been coming for a long time." Emily's accusations were just the last straw. After we hung up, I sat for a long time, thinking about everything that had happened. The constant drama, the accusations, the family strife, it all seemed so pointless, so destructive. And for what? I made a decision then. I called Dad back. "Dad," I said, my voice steady, "I've been thinking. I don't want to have any contact with Emily anymore. Or Linda. I can't keep doing this." There was a long pause. Then, "I understand, honey. I really do. You have to take care of yourself." His support gave me the courage to take the next step. The following day, I contacted a lawyer and filed for a restraining order against Emily. It felt extreme, but after everything that had happened, I knew it was necessary. To my relief, the judge granted the order. Emily couldn't come near me, my home, or my businesses. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. Afterwards, as Jake and I sat on our porch watching the sunset, I felt a sense of peace settling over me. I should have done this years ago, I said softly. Set boundaries, I mean. Maybe things wouldn't have gotten so out of hand. Jake squeezed my hand. You can't change the past. But you're taking control of your future, that's what matters. I nodded, leaning into him. You know, I've been thinking, maybe it's time we revisited the idea of adoption. We have so much love to give, Jake. Why not share it with a child who needs it? As we sat there, planning our future, I felt truly hopeful for the first time in ages. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, dealing with my fractured family, starting the adoption process, but I knew with Jake by my side, I could handle anything. Life had thrown me plenty of curveballs, but I was still standing. My business was thriving, I had a loving husband, and now, the possibility of a child to call our own. Emily and her drama no longer had the power to overshadow all the good in my life. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I made a silent promise to myself. No more letting others dictate my worth. No more shrinking to make others comfortable. From now on, I would stand tall, proud of who I am and what I've accomplished. After all, family isn't just about blood. It's about love, support, and understanding. And looking at Jake, thinking about our future child, I knew I had all the family I needed right here. I never knew what a real family was supposed to be like until I was 7 years old. My name's Rebecca, but everyone calls me Becky. I grew up thinking that all families were like mine, cold, distant, and devoid of affection. My dad, a successful dentist with his own practice, and my mom, who worked as his nurse, provided for me materially, but that was about it. From as far back as I can remember, hugs and kisses were foreign concepts in our house. My parents never showed any warmth towards me, and I just assumed that's how things were supposed to be. We lived in a nice house, had good food on the table, and I always had clean clothes to wear. But something was missing, and I couldn't put my finger on it. Our family didn't socialize much. We rarely had visitors, and I never went to other kids' houses. It was just us, in our own little bubble. Looking back, I realize how isolated we were, but at the time, it seemed normal. Everything changed when I made friends with a girl in my class, Sarah. One day, she invited me over to her house after school. I remember walking into her home and feeling like I'd stepped into another world. Sarah's mom greeted us at the door with a warm smile. "Hi, sweetie," she said, pulling Sarah into a tight hug. "And you must be Becky. It's so nice to meet you." Before I knew what was happening, she had wrapped her arms around me too. I froze, not knowing how to react. The hug was nice. Warm. Comforting. All these new sensations washed over me, and I felt my eyes start to water. As we sat in Sarah's living room doing our homework, I couldn't help but notice how different everything felt. Sarah's mom would pop in occasionally, asking if we needed anything, ruffling Sarah's hair, or giving her a quick peck on the cheek. Each time, I felt a pang in my chest. When it was time for me to go home, Sarah's mom offered to drive me. As we pulled up to my house, she turned to me with a kind smile. "It was lovely having you over, Becky. You're welcome anytime." Then, to my absolute shock, she leaned over and kissed me on the cheek. "Good night, sweetie." I stumbled out of the car, my mind reeling. As I walked into my house, I saw my parents sitting in the living room, engrossed in their own activities. My mom was reading a book, while my dad was looking over some papers. "I'm home," I said hesitantly. My mom barely glanced up. "Did you finish your homework at Sarah's?" "Yes," I replied, then gathered my courage. "Mom, Dad, why don't you ever kiss me goodnight?" The silence that followed was deafening. My mom finally looked up from her book, her expression a mix of confusion and irritation. "What are you talking about, Rebecca? We feed you, clothe you, and provide a roof over your head. That should be enough for you." I felt my heart sink. "But that's enough, Rebecca," my dad interjected, not looking up from his papers. Go to your room and get ready for bed." That night, as I lay in bed, I realized for the first time that something was wrong in our family. The warmth I had felt in Sarah's home was completely absent in mine. And as I drifted off to sleep, I wondered why my parents couldn't love me the way Sarah's mom loved her. As I grew older, the stark difference between my family and others became increasingly apparent. By the time I hit my teenage years, I had a clearer understanding of what was wrong. My mother was the root of the problem. Mom had always been a cold woman, seemingly incapable of showing emotion towards anyone, let alone affection. It wasn't just me she treated this way. I noticed she was equally distant with Dad. It was as if she was made of ice, impenetrable and unyielding. I started noticing more and more how burdened they seemed by their parental duties. They'd attend parent-teacher meetings, sure, but their faces always held barely concealed irritation, as if they'd rather be anywhere else. When my 16th birthday rolled around, I had a foolish hope that things might change. Maybe they'd surprise me with a heartfelt gift or even just a warm hug. Instead, I got a cold dose of reality. "Rebecca," Mom said over breakfast, her tone as flat as ever. "Your father and I need to discuss something with you." Dad cleared his throat. "We wanted to make it clear that you shouldn't expect us to pay for your college education. We're not required to do so." The words hit me like a slap in the face. I stared at them, unable to speak. "You're old enough now to start thinking about your future," Mom continued, not noticing or not caring about my shocked expression. "If you want to go to college, you'll need to figure out how to pay for it yourself." I nodded numbly, pushing away from the table. "Thanks for letting me know," I managed to say before retreating to my room. That day marked a turning point for me. I realized that if I wanted anything in life, I'd have to get it for myself. My parents weren't going to help me, they'd made that crystal clear. After graduating high school, I knew I needed to start earning more money. College seemed like a distant dream, but I was determined to make it happen someday. That's how I found myself working as a waitress at Joe's Diner, a small local restaurant just a few blocks from our house. Joe, the owner, was a middle-aged man with a perpetual 5 o'clock shadow and a belly that spoke of too many taste tests in the kitchen. When I applied for the job, he looked me up and down with a grin that made me slightly uncomfortable. Well, he said, stroking his chin. "You'll definitely attract customers with those looks, sweetheart. You're hired." 3 months into my new job, my life took another dramatic turn. It was a Tuesday morning, and I was getting ready for my afternoon shift when my parents called me down for breakfast. This was unusual. We rarely ate together, let alone had conversations over meals. As I sat down, I noticed my parents exchanging glances. My mother, her face as impassive as ever, spoke first. "Rebecca, your father and I have some news," she said, her voice devoid of any emotion. "We've decided to sell the house and move to Europe. The sale will be finalized next month." I waited for them to continue, to tell me about their plans for me. But the silence stretched on. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. "So, what about me?" I asked, my voice small. "Am I coming with you?" My parents exchanged another look, this one tinged with what seemed like annoyance. My father cleared his throat. "Rebecca, you're an adult," he said, his tone matter of fact. "It's time for you to find your own place to live. We've fulfilled our duty. You're of legal age now, which means you need to figure things out on your own." Anger and disbelief warred inside me. "This is my home too," I shouted, standing up so quickly my chair toppled over. "You can't just throw me out." My father actually laughed, a cold, humorless sound that sent chills down my spine. "This house is my property, Becky. You have no claim to it." Tears stung my eyes as the full weight of their callousness hit me. Without another word, I ran upstairs and started throwing my belongings into a suitcase. As I was about to leave, my parents stopped me at the door. "Show us what's in the suitcase," my mother demanded, her eyes narrowed with suspicion. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Are you serious? You think I'm stealing from you?" "We just want to make sure you're not taking anything valuable," my father said, as if it was the most reasonable request in the world. That was the last straw. Years of pent-up anger and hurt came pouring out of me in a torrent of curse words and accusations. I screamed at them, calling them every nasty name I could think of, telling them they were the worst parents in the world. They didn't even flinch. When I ran out of steam, my mother simply opened the door and gestured for me to leave. With nowhere else to go, I headed to Joe's diner for my shift, dragging my suitcase behind me. Joe looked up from behind the counter, his eyebrows shooting up when he saw my suitcase. "Becky, what's going on?" I tried to keep it together, I really did. But as soon as he asked, the dam broke. Tears started streaming down my face as I told him everything, how my parents were selling the house, moving to Europe, and had kicked me out without a care in the world. Joe listened, his face growing more concerned with each word. When I finished, he reached out and took my hand. "Oh, sweetheart, that's terrible. Listen, I might be able to help you out." For a moment, hope fluttered in my chest. But then I saw the look in his eyes, and my stomach dropped. "You could stay at my place," he continued, his thumb rubbing circles on the back of my hand. "But you'd need to show me how grateful you are." I yanked my hand away, disgust replacing my sadness. "Are you kidding me?" Joe's face hardened. "Fine, have it your way. But if you're not going to take my offer, you can consider yourself fired. I don't need your drama in my diner." I rented a room at a cheap hostel for the night. As I sat on the lumpy bed, I pulled out my phone and opened my parents' social media pages. I'd never paid much attention to them before, but now I scrolled through their friends lists desperately, looking for any relatives who might be willing to help me. One by one, I reached out to them, explaining my situation. And one by one, they turned me down. Some were polite about it, others less so, but the result was the same, no one wanted to take me in. Just when I was about to give up hope, I got a message from someone I'd never met, my mother's aunt, Evelyn. She lived in another state but said she'd be willing to let me stay with her for a while. With no other options, I used the last of my money to buy a bus ticket to Aunt Evelyn's town. When I finally arrived, Aunt Evelyn was waiting for me at the bus station. She looked a lot like my mother, the same sharp features and steely eyes. "Rebecca," she said, nodding at me. "Welcome." As we drove to her house, Aunt Evelyn laid out the ground rules. "You can stay in the spare room. I expect you to keep it clean and help out around the house. And you'll need to find a job, I'm not running a charity here." The next few weeks fell into a routine. I found a job at a local cafe, worked long hours, and spent my free time cleaning Aunt Evelyn's house and cooking meals. She was always polite but distant, watching me with a wariness I couldn't understand. One evening, as I was dusting the living room, my eyes fell on a framed photograph I hadn't noticed before. It showed a young man with a bright smile, his arm around a younger version of Aunt Evelyn. "Aunt Evelyn?" I called out. "Who's this in the photo?" I heard a sharp intake of breath behind me. When I turned around, I saw something I never expected, tears in Aunt Evelyn's eyes. That's my son," she said, her voice cracking. "He died in a car accident 10 years ago." I put down the duster and did something I'd never done before, I hugged her. To my surprise, she hugged me back, her body shaking with silent sobs. When we finally pulled apart, Aunt Evelyn looked at me with wonder. "You know, I always thought you'd be just like your mother, cold and unfeeling." I shook my head, feeling my own tears welling up. "And I thought you were just like her too." I guess we were both wrong. As the days passed, Aunt Evelyn and I grew closer. The warmth I'd always craved from my parents, I found in her. We'd spend evenings talking, sharing stories, and slowly healing the wounds of our pasts. For the first time in my life, I felt truly loved and accepted. One evening, about 2 months after I'd arrived, Aunt Evelyn sat me down with a serious look on her face. My heart skipped a beat, fearing the worst. Was she going to ask me to leave? "Rebecca," she began, her voice soft but firm. "I want to talk to you about something important." When my son died, I set aside money for his college education. It's been sitting in an account for years now, and, well, I've been thinking. She reached out and took my hand, squeezing it gently. I want you to have it, for your education. I stared at her, unable to comprehend what I was hearing. What? But that's your son's money. I can't. You can, and you will, Aunt Evelyn said firmly. My boy would have wanted it to be used for something good. And you, Rebecca, you deserve a chance at a better life. Without hesitation, I threw my arms around her, sobbing into her shoulder. Thank you, I whispered. Thank you so much. And just like that, my life changed again. I enrolled in the local college as a business major, determined to make Aunt Evelyn proud. We settled into a new routine. I'd go to classes during the day, work part-time at the cafe in the evenings, and spend my nights studying at the kitchen table while Aunt Evelyn knitted in her favorite armchair. For 2 years, life was good. Better than good, actually. It was everything I'd ever dreamed of. I had a loving family, I was getting an education, and I felt like I was finally on the path to a bright future. But life has a way of throwing curveballs when you least expect them. It was a crisp autumn afternoon when there was a knock at the door. I was home alone, working on a paper for my marketing class. Assuming it was a package delivery, I opened the door without a second thought. The woman standing on the porch made my blood run cold. Her hair was grayer, her face more lined, but there was no mistaking those cold, hard eyes. Hello, Rebecca, my mother said, her voice as emotionless as ever. I gripped the doorframe, my knees suddenly weak. Mom, what are you doing here? She looked past me into the house, her lips pursed. I need to speak with Evelyn. Is she home? I shook my head, still in shock. She's out running errands. She'll be back soon. My mother nodded curtly. I'll wait, then. Before I could protest, she brushed past me into the house. I closed the door, my mind racing. What was she doing here? After 2 years of silence, why now? As we sat in uncomfortable silence in the living room, I took a good look at my mother. She wasn't the well-put-together woman I remembered. Her clothes were wrinkled, her hair unkempt. There was a desperation in her eyes that I'd never seen before. Finally, unable to bear the tension any longer, I broke the silence. Why are you here, Mom? She met my gaze, and for a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of emotion. But it was gone so quickly, I might have imagined it. I need help, she said flatly. Your father and I were no longer together. We moved to Italy, as planned. Your father, he met someone else. A younger woman. He left me for her. Before I could respond, we heard the front door open. Aunt Evelyn walked in, her arms full of grocery bags. When she saw my mother, she froze. Helen, Aunt Evelyn said, her voice clipped. What brings you here after all this time? My mother straightened her posture, trying to regain some of her old authority. Evelyn, I need your help. I've fallen on hard times. Aunt Evelyn's eyebrows shot up. Oh? And what about your comfortable life in Italy? Things didn't work out as planned, my mother replied, her voice tight. John left me for another woman. I have nowhere else to go. You're my only option, Evelyn. Aunt Evelyn let out a harsh laugh. Oh, that's rich coming from you, Helen. Do you remember when I needed your help? When I lost my son and couldn't even afford a proper funeral? Where were you then? I saw my mother flinch, but she quickly regained her composure. That was different. Different? Aunt Evelyn interrupted, her voice rising. How was it different? Because it wasn't you who needed help? The tension in the room was unbearable. I felt like I should say something, do something, but I was frozen in place, watching this family drama unfold. My mother's eyes suddenly locked onto me. Rebecca, she said, her voice taking on an edge of desperation. You owe me, I'm your mother. I felt a surge of anger rise within me. I owe you? You kicked me out without a second thought. You told me I was on my own. And now you have the nerve to say I owe you? I raised you, my mother began, but I cut her off. You provided the bare minimum, I spat out. Food, clothes, a roof over my head. But you never gave me what I really needed: love, support, affection. You were cold and distant my entire life, and when I needed you most, you threw me out like I was nothing. My mother's face paled. Tears were streaming down my face now, but I didn't care. And now you come here, expecting help? Expecting me to forget everything you've done, or rather, everything you didn't do? Well, guess what, Mom? I'm doing just fine without you. I found someone who actually cares about me, who supports me, who loves me. I don't need you anymore. The room fell silent after my outburst. Aunt Evelyn stepped forward, placing a comforting hand on my shoulder. I think it's time for you to leave, Helen, she said firmly. My mother looked between us, realization dawning on her face. Without another word, she stood up and walked to the door. As the door closed behind her, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I turned to Aunt Evelyn, who pulled me into a tight hug. I'm so proud of you, sweetheart, she murmured, stroking my hair. You stood up for yourself. You're stronger than you know. As I cried into her shoulder, I felt a mix of emotions: relief, sadness, anger, and strangely, a sense of freedom. For the first time in my life, I had confronted my mother and spoken my truth. It hurt, but it also felt like the beginning of healing. About a week after the incident, I was walking across campus when I overheard a group of my classmates whispering and glancing in my direction. As I got closer, I caught snippets of their conversation. That's her, the one whose mother. Can you believe she'd abandoned her own mom? My stomach dropped. How did they know about what happened? I quickened my pace, my cheeks burning with embarrassment and anger. It didn't take long to figure out what was going on. My mother had taken up residence in a cheap motel on the outskirts of town and had started showing up at the college, telling anyone who would listen about how her ungrateful daughter had abandoned her in her time of need. For days, she sat on a bench near the main entrance, accosting students and staff alike with her tale of woe. My classmates began to whisper behind my back, some giving me looks of pity, others of judgment. I tried to ignore it, to focus on my studies, but it was hard. One afternoon, after a particularly grueling class where I could feel everyone's eyes on me, I broke down and told Aunt Evelyn everything. The next day, with Aunt Evelyn by my side for moral support, I approached a group of my classmates who were huddled near the campus coffee shop. I took a deep breath and spoke up. Hey, guys. I need to talk to you about something. About my mother. They turned to look at me, their expressions a mix of curiosity and wariness. And so, I began to talk. I told them everything, about my childhood in a cold, loveless home, about being kicked out the moment I turned 18, about struggling to survive on my own until Aunt Evelyn took me in. As I spoke, I saw their expressions change from skepticism to shock, and finally, to understanding. By the time I finished, there were tears in more than a few eyes. One of my classmates, Sarah, stepped forward and hugged me. Becky, I'm so sorry. We had no idea. Your mom, she made it sound so different. Word spread quickly after that. My classmates, now armed with the truth, became my fiercest defenders. When my mother tried to approach them with her tales of abandonment, they shut her down. The college security, alerted to the situation, began escorting her off campus whenever she showed up. A week later, I heard through the grapevine that my mother had given up and left town. She had returned to our hometown, taking a job as a nurse at the local clinic and renting a small apartment. I felt relieved and calm. Life had settled into a comfortable rhythm. After the tumultuous events with my mother, I found my footing again and threw myself back into my studies with renewed determination. My grades improved, and I was on track to graduate with honors. One ordinary afternoon, as I was reviewing notes for an upcoming exam, my phone buzzed with a notification. A message from an unexpected sender, my father. My heart skipped a beat as I opened it, curiosity and apprehension mingling in my chest. The message read, "Rebecca, I hope this finds you well. I'm reaching out because I have a proposition for you. I've remarried in Italy and have a young son now. We could use some help with childcare. Would you consider coming to stay with us? You could be a nanny for your half-brother. I know you probably don't have many prospects there, so this could be a great opportunity for you." I stared at the screen, a mixture of disbelief and amusement washing over me. After years of silence, this was what he had to offer. A job as an unpaid nanny for a half-brother I'd never met? The audacity was almost comical. Without hesitation, I typed a single word in response, "No." Seconds later, my phone buzzed again. My father, clearly taken aback by my curt reply, began asking questions. Where was I living? How was I supporting myself? What was I doing with my life? A mischievous smile played on my lips as I scrolled through my photo gallery. I selected a picture of myself on campus, beaming in front of the business school building, and another of me laughing in Aunt Evelyn's cozy kitchen. I sent these images without comment. The response was immediate. Message after message flooded in, each more frantic than the last. How had I managed to go to college? Where was I getting the money? Whose house do I live in? I took a deep breath, savoring the moment. Then I typed out one final message, "That's none of your business." With a sense of finality, I blocked his number. Months passed, and before I knew it, graduation day arrived. As I stood in line, waiting to receive my diploma, my eyes scanned the audience. There, in the third row, sat Aunt Evelyn, her face glowing with pride. She clapped the loudest when my name was called, and I couldn't help but beam as I crossed the stage. Looking at Aunt Evelyn, I made a silent vow. I would build a life that would make her proud. I would take the love and support she had given me and pay it forward. I would show her, and the world, that family isn't just about blood, it's about choice, love, and commitment.